deep down, he trusted that we loved him and that we were there for him, and that put a little bit of a brake on certain things. I mean, it's a desire to survive,
yeah.
You know, and that put a little, and I think that's where we made the mistake, is that we didn't trust that he had that.
But I think I'm lucky in the sense that I have parents that care about me, and because of that, when I would go out and do, you know, things like drugs and stuff like that, I'd feel a tremendous amount of guilt, because I'd think, oh, they're thinking about me right now. They want me to do good.
The public story of Nick Reiner has often been told through headlines, court filings, and the legacy of his famous parents. But one of the earliest windows into his private struggles comes from someone who knew him long before the tragedy that later defined his name. That window comes from Danny Sviler, a former rehab roommate who shared space with Nick when they were both teenagers, and whose recollections, reported by multiple media outlets, have added a human, if unsettling, layer to understanding Nick's early emotional state. According to Swiler, he met Nick Reiner when they were both around 15 years old at an expensive rehabilitation facility in Malibu, a place designed for adolescents from wealthy or high-profile families dealing with substance use and behavioral issues. At first, Svilar described Nick as personable, funny, and engaging, someone who could easily fit in and charm others. But that early impression, he said, did not last long. Over time, Sviler claims he began to see signs of deep anger, resentment, and emotional volatility that went far beyond typical teenage rebellion. One of the most striking elements of Sviler's account is Nick's attitude toward his parents.
What struck me, I think, the most is this quote from the roommate where he says, "As soon as I saw that Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were murdered, I knew exactly who it was." And that even all these years later, when he saw the news.
According to the roommate, Nick frequently expressed intense hatred toward them, particularly his father, filmmaker Rob Reiner. Sviler said these statements were not made casually or jokingly, but with real bitterness. He claimed Nick spoke as though his parents were adversaries rather than caretakers, framing their repeated attempts to help him as control or punishment rather than concern. In Sviler's words, Nick seemed to resent being pushed toward treatment, even as his family continued to fund and support it. Sviler described Nick as lacking gratitude for the resources around him, a perception that stood out sharply in a rehab environment where many patients lacked family support or financial stability. He recalled Nick complaining that his parents only wanted him to get help, while Nick himself wanted freedom to use substances and live without restrictions. These statements, as reported, painted a picture of a young person who felt trapped, misunderstood, and increasingly hostile toward authority figures, especially those closest to him. The former roommate also recounted an incident that suggested Nick's anger could escalate beyond words. Sviler said that during a casual exchange, a joke he made, one involving a comparison to another celebrity's late child, provoked a sudden and aggressive reaction from Nick. According to Sviler, Nick attempted to become physical, and staff had to separate them. While no long-term consequences were publicly reported from that moment, the incident stood out to Sviler as a sign that Nick's emotional regulation was fragile, and that seemingly minor triggers could lead to explosive responses. These recollections are significant not because they predict future events, but because they align with other independent reporting about long-term strain within the Reiner family. In earlier interviews, Nick himself acknowledged that he did not bond closely with his father during childhood. He suggested their relationship felt distant, only shifting later in life when they collaborated on the 2015 film Being Charlie, a project that directly explored addiction, recovery, and parent-child conflict. That collaboration was often described publicly as an attempt at mutual understanding, a creative bridge over years of emotional distance. Over time, Nick's struggles reportedly expanded beyond substance use. Later reporting has stated that he was diagnosed with serious mental health conditions, including schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, and that his parents openly acknowledged these challenges while seeking treatment options. Family friends have described Rob and Michelle Reiner as deeply compassionate, committed to helping not only their son, but others struggling within the justice and mental health systems. This contrast between parental devotion and Nick's reported resentment adds complexity rather than clarity to the family story. It is important to emphasize that Sviler's account represents one individual's memories from adolescence, shared years later, and filtered through time, emotion, and personal interpretation. These statements are not legal findings, medical evaluations, or definitive explanations for Nick's later life. They do not establish causation, intent, or inevitability. What they do offer is a snapshot, a moment in which a troubled teenager expressed rage, entitlement, and confusion in a structured environment meant to help him. In the broader context, these early accounts highlight how long-term mental health struggles can coexist with privilege, opportunity, and family support, and still remain unresolved. They also show how resentment can harden over time when illness, addiction, and fractured communication intersect.